What was the story leading up to your final arrest to when you actually went to prison? Like, explain the story how you're when you're on the run and you did some research and you figured out how to create a bunch of fake identities and then you tried to eventually fake your death.
Yeah, well, the fake identity started basically, getting fake ID to go to bars. Because I was all the East Coast colleges, so I had a bunch of buddies at West Virginia University, right, in Morgantown, and it was like you could just go up there, and you need a fake ID for the bars on Main Street, so you would just go down in somebody's room, and they would like have all the photography stuff, everything set up, where they could process it, the computer stuff, and print it out. And that's when I first started getting fake IDs, So I had a bunch of, I was 17, 18, 19. I got a whole bunch of fake IDs just to go to the bars at the colleges. It's like some bullshit, it's not going to stand up. But, at night, going in with the bouncers, that shit's
good enough.
Yeah, it's good enough. So that was kind of like my first experience with fake IDs. So then when I caught the case, and I started deciding, I was going to take off. I already had some fake IDs, but I was like, man, they're not going to, stand the test of time, like in the daylight with a cop.
Right.
I'm like, this shit ain't going to work. So
you got like holograms and shit built into them, but was it like that back then?
Yeah, they had like the little holograms, but it would be like, it would just be like pressed or something. So
right.
it would try to emulate a hologram, but it would be like pressed on the plastic or whatever. So, it really, wasn't that good. But so I was like, man, I got to find a real ID. And I'd actually read this book, the book that they made into a movie. They made the movie Catch Me If You Can, like 2000 or something, early 2000s. But the dude wrote the book like in the mid 80s. He wrote that book. So I'd actually read that book. And I'd read other stuff like that. And I was kind of interested in stuff like that, for... I wouldn't say from like a criminal pursuit, but more like from a scholarly or academic pursuit. I've always been a big reader, so I was interested in basically like how people would like, and I don't even want to say fraud, but just how people would get over.
Mm-hmm.
Not like in a fraudulent way, like you're ripping people off for money. Just how people would like get over on authority. That's always kind of been my thing. And I found these companies, man. They had these companies, Paladin Press, Loom Panics Unlimited, and it was like subversive books. Like probably one of the most famous books that a lot of people have heard of that these companies sold was the Anarchist Cookbook, which in the mid 90s, exploded, when the internet, came around and the Anarchist Cookbook came out and basically taught everybody how to make meth. So that's probably the most famous. But these companies, all they sold was like these subversive underground books, how to do, and it's all protected by the First Amendment right. So I'm not even sure if these companies, like after the Patriot Act, I think they, put these companies out of business. So I'm not even sure if they still exist, but they had like, you could get their catalogs and they had like this whole section on like getting fake ID, right? But not even fake ID, like real ID. So what I did is I ordered like all these books, man. I ordered like 25 books. It was like, there was this one author, like it was like called Reborn in America, Trent Sands. They had this whole series called The Paper Trip. It was like The Paper Trip 1, 2, 3, 4. They had like books like Understanding U.S. Identifying Documents, just like a litany of books, man. They had like there was probably 40 or 50 of these books. So I ordered like 25. And I read them all, man. I read them like from cover to cover. And that's the type of dude I am too. Like when I want to do something, I like to read, I like to research, and I like to read, and I like to get as much knowledge as I can about it. But then I like to make my own plan. You know what I'm saying? Based off the information, that I attained. Because sometimes you would read one of these books and there might be like one page or like one chapter that I actually learned something. Because a lot of it was just like rehash. A lot of these books rehash, but there might be one insight that the author gives you, that you can take, and it's very valuable. So, I did that, and I basically learned to, what they call paper trip, and that was like, I would get real ID from the Department of Motor Vehicles, licenses, like what they call the walker licenses, like not a driver's license, just a walker's
Just
license.
ID.
And I would do this. What I learned from these books is you want to find a candidate that died before he was 5. So find someone that passed away for whatever reasons, died before they were 5. And you wanted to find somebody that was born in one state and died in another state. Because, back then, even back then they probably had the technology, but, they didn't have the money to cross-reference all these records. So let's say, like, if you're born in Tampa Bay and you die in Tampa Bay, it's like the same department.
Right, same place they could find all your info.
They call it, it's like the vital health records or, Department of Vital Statistics or whatever. So they match your records up and they'll stamp deceased on the birth certificate. But if you die in one state and you're born in another state, especially different states, they don't even do it on a state level. Probably like even in Florida, they don't even do it. It's different counties. But definitely they don't do it across state lines. So once I found this out, I would scour the obituaries, right? So I would go through obituaries and I would look. This was my candidate. I would look for a candidate, somebody that was under 5. And the reason I would pick somebody under 5, because typically, especially back then, in the 70s, like I was born in 1971, so I was looking somebody, that was born like anywhere from 68 to 70, 76. I had about an 8-year window. But especially back then, before you were 5, you didn't get a social security number. I don't know, nowadays they may give it to you younger, you know what I'm saying? But back then, they didn't get you a social security number, sometimes not until you were like a teenager, and you started working.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so things were different back then, So you would want a kid under 5 because then they don't have any other, records of vital statistics. So it's just basically the birth certificate. So I would look through the obituaries, and in the obituaries, I'm looking for this candidate, and then from the obituary, you basically, get a lot of information that you need to order the birth certificate, right? From the obituary, I would get, like, to order somebody's death certificate, you need to know their name, place of death, date of death, right? So I could find somebody there. I get those 3 things. I order the death certificate. Then with the obituary and the death certificate, I can get the 5 things that I need for the birth certificate. Because to get the birth certificate, you need like full name, place of birth, date of birth, father's full name, mother's maiden name, right? And like I say, these are just the vital, statistic bureaus or whatever. So, basically you write a letter, you do it through a mail drop, like a P.O. box that looks like a real address, and you send them a money order, like $8 or $10, and you say, like, basically, like, I'm the person's father, or I'm the person's, and it just has to be a relative, and so you write. And then once you got the obituary, you find the candidate, you get the death certificate to get all the information you need for the birth certificate. Once you get the birth certificate, you're pretty much home free. Because look, I can get that birth certificate, and now this is like whatever, I'm like 20. So, and a lot of times maybe the older you get, it's harder to do, and it's probably harder to do now because they got identity theft and all that. Back then, they didn't even have identity theft. They didn't have identity theft till like around the mid 90s or something. Yeah. So it wasn't even back then. You could legally have an ID in someone else's name as long as you weren't using it for fraudulent purposes.
Wow.
But that's like America, that's what America used to be about, stuff like that. It's changed a lot. But so once I got the birth certificate, I was home free, because then I could go in to any DMV, right? And a lot of times, if you just get the walker's license, not the driver's license, all you need is a birth certificate and like an address, address that says you live here, like an electric bill or something like that, in that name. Right? And to get the driver's license, you just need to verify a social security number. And so what I used to do to verify a social security number, I had this book. It was called Understanding U.S. Identifying Documents. And in the Understanding U.S. Identifying Documents, each state has like your first 3 numbers in your social security number are by state. So each state has, like, from whatever, 039 to 042. So that determines the state. Then the 2 middle numbers go by the year. But it's not like if you were born in 71, the middle 2 numbers are going to be 71. It's like if you were born in 71 in that state, the numbers might be 23. But it's all done by a chart. It's all like corresponding. They have these charts in the book, because that's what the Social Security Administration people use. And then the last 4 numbers are random. So what I would do is, depending on where the person was born, I would fucking determine what the number is. I would look at the charts, and the years and everything, and then I would determine that. And then like I would get a W-2 form, right? And I would put that Social Security number and that person's name, whose identity I was going to assume, and I'd make it seem like I worked at like some local place, restaurant or whatever, and I'd write their address and I'd do a W-2 form, just like, they give you a W-2 form. And you can get W-2 forms from like any like business wholesale supply company. You can go buy like a box of like those government printed,
Right.
like, I mean, I don't know what it is now, but back then, because everything's probably electronic now, but back then it's like, these multi, like, so it makes like 5 copies.
Yeah. The carbon copies.
Yeah. That's so, you could just type it right on. I have a typewriter. I would type that shit on, and then I would go in. I'd have the birth certificate. I would have the W-2 to verify my Social Security. Even though the Social Security was fake, under scrutiny, the Social Security number would not stand up because it was fake. But a lot of times when you just go to the driver's license, that Social Security more like if you went to a bank or you try to open a bank account, because I did that a couple times. I tried to open a bank account under these assumed names, and the Social Security number never stood up because they would tell me straight up. They'd be like, are you sure that's your right Social Security number? And I'd be like, oh, I think I need to get the fuck out of here.